Hello, and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Our topic tonight is federal overreach, but a different type than we discussed last week. This week, we'll be talking about FBI abuses of powers, specifically in Tennessee, and legislation that needs to be passed to address it. With us tonight to talk about the issue and the legislation is Aundrea Gomez. Aundrea, thank you for being with us tonight. How are you doing?
Hi, Dave. I'm doing well, thanks.
So, I know some people have heard about this topic, others may not know as much about it, but let's just give them a taste of some of the examples of abuses that have occurred by the FBI in Tennessee over the last couple of years.
Well, I would say there's probably many. I'll just highlight some of the ones that, well, one that everyone probably knows about, which was the case of Paul Vaughn and other pro-life activists that were in Wilson County. And they were praying and singing hymns at an abortion clinic. They were asked to leave. Most of them did. A couple of them came back. There were no charges filed locally, but 17 months later, after the Dobbs decision, the Biden administration, Joe Biden's Department of Justice, decided to charge those activists with a FACE Act violation. And I'm blanking on the acronym. It's
Federal access, and I can't remember the other.
Yeah. It has to do with blocking access to a clinic, like an abortion clinic.
Right.
And they weren't blocking the access, but that's what they were charged with. And some of them were also charged with conspiracy charges.
Conspiracy.
Yeah, because I think some of them had communicated through I don't know if it was a messaging app or if it was Facebook Messenger or something like that. So that because they had, been planning the protest, because that's what pro-life activists do, that they turned that into a conspiracy charge. So those 11 that were charged by Joe Biden's DOJ, FBI, those 11 have been found guilty. I know that Paul Vaughn didn't get an actual sentence. I think it was I don't know if it was deferred or something along those lines. So he didn't get jail time. I think he has probation time. But there were, I think, at least one person that got 6 months in prison. But they still have a felony conviction on their record for praying and singing hymns outside of an abortion clinic. So this was clearly weaponization from the Department of Justice. This was retaliation for the Dobbs decision. Let's make the process the punishment. Let's make these people an example to others so they don't think that they could go and sing and pray at an abortion clinic and get away with it. Right. So that's probably one of the more famous ones that you and your viewers would be familiar with. One that another example of weaponization in FBI that we really don't know the story on was in August of 2023. A 45-year-old veteran living with his mother in Henderson, Tennessee. So that's Chester County, right?
I think so.
If I know my counties. The FBI swatted the home, pulled his mother out of the home, would not give her any information or answer any questions for her about why they were there. And they subsequently raided the home and they shot him and killed him. And he was unarmed. He was standing in the kitchen and they could clearly see where he was inside the home, and they shot him and killed him. And the local authorities have reported that they knew nothing about the raid going into it. So they had no knowledge. That's what they're saying. I mean, we don't know. But since then, no questions have been answered. And I don't know that we ever would get any answers.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember that there were some people that were trying to find out what happened. Why were they trying to arrest him? Why was he killed? And I haven't heard anything, and I don't think anybody from that area has heard anything. As I understood it, like you said, the sheriff didn't know anything about it. I always thought that if the FBI was going to go in and do something like that, that the sheriff was supposed to be involved. I would think he would have to be involved. Of course, the federal government gets away with a lot, and unfortunately, states and local governments let them get away with a lot, from what I can tell. But that one, it's amazing that this much time has passed and nothing has come out about what happened and why he was killed, or why we don't even know why they were there. I have yet to hear what the warrant was about. Have you heard anything on that?
Have not. The only thing I know for sure is he was unarmed. So, I mean, he's disabled. He was struggling with some PTSD, but he was unarmed. He was in his home. You know, could they have had a conversation with him? Could they have maybe spoken to him as he was leaving the home at some point? I mean, did they really have to SWAT the home and shoot the man and kill him? For whatever, I mean, clearly he was unarmed, so he wasn't a threat.
Right.
You know, meanwhile, we know, you know, that the FBI knew for a year about the kid that was making threats down in Georgia at the school. They've known about him. They were tipped off to him a year ago. So you know, it just seems like there's a lack of balance here. You know, when they know about threats to, say, the president, the former president of the United States, or they know about a threat to some school children, they don't seem to be acting. Right. But this man wasn't a threat to anybody, and they took him out. You know, Paul Vaughn and those pro-life activists that were praying and worshiping in an abortion clinic, they were not a threat to anybody, and they swatted them and arrested them in their homes in front of their children. Yeah,
that was one of those early morning raids, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yep. And then there's the many examples across the country, not just Tennessee, but definitely in Tennessee, of just patriotic people who were in the area of the Capitol on January 6th, didn't go into the Capitol, didn't participate in any activities that were illegal, just standing on the grass or in the general vicinity. And they've all had visits, not raids, not SWATs, but they've had visits, intimidating visits from the FBI. So those are just a couple of examples. Certainly none of us wants to be on the wrong end of one of those visits. You know, the idea of, you know, being a Christian and being targeted for your beliefs and for exercising your First Amendment rights to pray, to worship, to share the belief that you have that a child is, you know, at conception, life starts at conception, and that it's wrong to murder babies, or to even exercise your First Amendment rights to go to a school board meeting and speak at a school board meeting about some of these inappropriate materials that we're finding in our schools. You know, these are First Amendment protected rights that we have in this country, and yet we have a weaponized Department of Justice and FBI who are targeting individuals like you and I and your viewers for exercising those rights because we're not on the same side of the political aisle as them. Yep. And this is a concern. It seems to be escalating and getting more urgent, that at the state level, we need to do something to address this. You and I have talked about the importance of red states, making their states like sanctuary states for freedom, red state sanctuaries, right?
Might call it a Constitution sanctuary state, because they don't seem to be following the Constitution anywhere much anymore. Yeah,
we could call it that. That would be great. But, you know, I don't know that the federal government has solutions for us. They seem to be spiraling out of control, and it's going to be up to the states to protect themselves.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, the states, they have a constitution. They take an oath. They take an oath to both constitutions, you know, the state and the U.S. Constitution. And they don't, it blows my mind that we're in this situation that we're in where, you know, I think our generation grew up with a lot of respect for the FBI, and now we can't trust them. And we know we can't trust them. Nobody with sense today thinks we can trust the FBI. I think that organization is going to have to be completely dismantled and rebuilt with a lot less power, for sure. You know, I'm surprised that with everything that's gone on, that more in law enforcement aren't leery of the FBI. I don't know. I know that I think part of the problem, and we'll get into this when we talk a little bit about the bill, is that there's always federal money. It always comes back to federal money. And of course, the FBI does give these different county organizations or city organizations that work with them for different things, they can get funding. And I think that is probably a big part of the problem. But let's talk specifically about what the legislation, now this legislation was proposed last year by Senator Hensley and by Representative Warner. And what was the intent of the legislation that was proposed last year? Because I know it's going to come back again this year in some form.
Yeah, the intent is to restore the balance and to empower your local law enforcement, because we are seeing, as you mentioned, money tends to neutralize the lower levels of government and kind of sucks the authority up to these higher levels of government. So, you know, we basically neuter our local law enforcement when the FBI comes in and dangles a carrot of money to the local law enforcement so that they can kind of co-opt and commandeer the staffing at the local level. And so that's currently what the FBI does. They are limited. They only have about 14,000 agents across the country. And how many people do we have in this country? I've lost track.
320. Who knows? I don't know how many illegals we got. Last count I heard, we got 320 million. We're people all together. I imagine we're pushing 400 million by this point.
Yeah, I think it's getting close to 350. But obviously that number is going up every day. And if you are against illegals coming across the border, that's just one more red flag that the FBI is going to, you're going to be in their crosshairs for. So currently, with that limited amount of agents across the country, they really do rely on the local law enforcement to be able to enforce their agenda, to be able to, to go after someone who, questions the authenticity of an election, or the moms at the school board meetings. They just don't have enough agents to spread out that thin. So they come into your county, and they they can go to the county sheriff, or they can go to your police department, and they will ask for some deputies or some officers to participate on a joint terrorism task force. And so this legislation, I want to be clear, only pertains to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the JTTF. It does not inhibit or prohibit any activities on any other task force. This is specifically the Joint Terrorism Task Force, because that's going to be the task force that's going to be studying those moms at school board meetings or studying those pro-life activists, okay? So currently, FBI will come in and say, hey, we could really use a couple of your deputies on this JTTF. And so your county sheriff will then deputize that, say, okay, go ahead, you can have these two guys, for example. So those two deputies will get a higher level security clearance so that they can work those FBI cases. Meanwhile, their superior, the county sheriff that you elected and that you pay for with your tax dollars, does not get that same security clearance. So he now gets cut out of the information sharing and doesn't really know what sort of cases that they're going to be working on. So,
and they might not be working just in their county. They may be working in that region, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. There's no reason why, because the FBI is going to cover all counties. So once they're on that JTTF, I suppose they could work cases in other counties as well. And we want our local law enforcement to participate in information sharing when it comes to, sex trafficking and drug trafficking and crime. We want information sharing on that. This is specifically this Joint Terrorism Task Force, where they're looking to target what they call agaves, the government anti-authority violent extremist. That's the American citizen that goes to church, that believes in the Constitution, that thinks that our federal government is assuming too much authority and too much control and so forth. So that's what we want to prohibit. We don't want to get in the way of actual criminal investigations. So that's currently what happens is they can come in and they commandeer these local law enforcement officers or deputy sheriffs and use them on these task forces. What the legislation will aim to do is to just restore the balance of power back into the hands of your county sheriff, so that your county sheriff is going to get the same security clearance and be responsible for approving the types of cases that his deputies are going to work on. So no authority over the cases that the FBI is going to be investigating. But if that county sheriff deems a case inappropriate for his deputies, say, for example, the case is a Paul Vaughn type case, right, and they're going to investigate these pro-life activists for their protected First Amendment speech, the county sheriff could say, no, my deputies are not going to participate in those investigations.
Yeah. Well, and if it's violating the Constitution, that county sheriff can say, and you're not going to do that in my county, if it's an obvious violation of the Constitution. Because sheriffs are the highest constitutional officers in their counties. A lot of them don't realize that, but they are.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of the sheriffs don't realize that. Yes, unfortunately. So this is really just about restoring that power. Those county sheriffs are accountable to their constituents, the people that voted them into office in the county, and also the taxpayers. We are paying their salary. So we want them to have the jurisdiction over what's going on in their county. And shouldn't they know if there's terrorism investigations? If that's being investigated in their county, actual terrorism or school board mom terrorism? What exactly are we looking at here? So the county sheriff should know about all of that.
Yeah.
So that's really all this legislation aims to do, is just to restore the power back to the county sheriff or your police chief. Okay, so they're nominated and hired by your law enforcement. So still accountable to the people in some way, shape, or form.
So,
but by contrast, the FBI is not.
Right. So as far as you know, the bill's going to come back pretty much in the form it was in last year?
Yes, that's the intent. We may, someone did suggest to me recently that we need to add some of the wording about the security clearance for the sheriffs, but that's the intent, is that the bill come back with the same objective as we had it last year. There was a little bit of a short on-ramp with the session last year. So I think it's 2 weeks into session, middle of January, beginning of February is the cutoff date, the deadline for filing bills. And I really hadn't planned on filing a bill, but as you know, I brought a colleague of mine to Tennessee, an FBI whistleblower, and we traveled across the state, and he spoke to a lot of grassroots across the state, people like you and I.
Yep.
And he really educated us on what's going on in the FBI and the mission and the quota system. And he really opened a lot of people's eyes, and including my own. And so after spending a week with him and hearing all of this information from him about what's going on in the FBI, we finally, by the end of the week, this was not what we planned to do at the beginning of the week. It wasn't until the end of the week when I was like, okay, we just told everybody what the problem is. What are we going to do now? Didn't we do something? And by the way, our session is beginning. So we did put together legislation and found our bill sponsors. But then it was very much like, okay, now we got to really try to get people on board with this. And so we didn't quite hit the goal on that aspect of it. I think there's a lot more support for it now, even with the legislators that maybe didn't quite get it the first time around. I think they have come around a little bit on understanding the importance of it. It's definitely not a good look for a legislator to not support this. Um, I don't think that's going to be a good look for someone to say, no, 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 no. The FBI is fantastic. They're wonderful. We trust them, and we don't trust our county sheriff. That's not going to be a good look.
Well, that is minus the portion about the county sheriff. What you said is pretty much what my state senator, Stevens, said. I mean, he was one of those who, well, if I recall right, I think the bill didn't get a second in that committee. Am I recalling that correctly? It didn't even get a second. And of course, when I asked him about it, he gave me this big story about, he's got a federal agent in his church who's a great guy, and, we shouldn't be talking down to federal agencies and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, are we watching the same news? Are we in the same country?
Well, and I would even ask him, why aren't you supporting your county sheriff in your local law enforcement?
Well, his answer was, he wasn't told, that he hasn't heard from any of them that they wanted. I said, well, have you asked any of them? Of course, didn't get a very good answer on that. But to that point, I do think, as you said, you guys started really late in the game last year. So I'm assuming you guys are going to be, if you haven't already started, working with the different county sheriffs and metro law enforcement so that they understand what the real intent of the bill is and why it's needed. And I can't comprehend how any sheriff in this day and age cannot see the need for this. I mean, the FBI is not being discreet about what they're saying. I mean, it's out there that they have made about half the country. They've pretty much declared us enemies.
That's right. Absolutely. So my goal is to always try to get the grassroots involved in this. And so through educating, and that's what I've been doing, is talking to groups about the legislation, helping them to understand. It's a pretty simple bill. I mean, it's a very simple bill, but it's very clear to see that the need for this type of legislation to protect citizens, to protect the state of Tennessee. So I think that part is easy to do, is to get the grassroots across the state to understand we need this, and this is the fix. And so then getting them to then take it to their legislators and their county sheriff and helping them to understand it is always more powerful for them to hear it from their constituents. I want them to hear it from the constituents, not just from me.
Right.
Because who am I? I don't vote them in. I live in one county. So I've talked to my county sheriff about it, and I think he supports it. But we can definitely, this is the goal for the rest of this calendar year until session begins, is to get this information out to help people understand, one, what the problem is and why we need to do something, why we need this legislation. What will the legislation do? And then communicate this with your state senators, your state rep, and your county sheriff, and help them understand it. So I do have a really simple primer, a little one-pager that I can share with the grassroots that will help equip them with what they need to know to be able to have conversations like this. And I'll be putting together some more resources over the next couple of months to support that as well.
Yeah, if you send me that, we can post it on the site here and people can go look it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I always recommend, just to kind of have a better picture of what the FBI is doing and what are the systemic problems within the FBI. My colleague Steve Friend put together a great video series, and I'll include that in that little one-pager as well. And they're short, like 2-3 minute videos where he goes through 10 of the top systemic problems within the FBI. And so people can see that and understand more about why this type of legislation is needed.
Yeah. So I'm sure that you probably plan on having him come back to the area before the session starts, or at least before the bill gets to committee.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to talk to him about that. I know he's also working on some other states, so it's possible that this is going to get run in a couple of other states next year. I don't want to say which ones.
Right.
I don't know for sure. But but that would be really exciting. It would be great to see Tennessee lead on something like this, but also great to see other states pick it up and run with it as well,
Yeah.
and really send a message. Again, we can't necessarily tell the FBI. I wish we could. I would just like to defund them.
Yeah.
And dismantle them, break them apart. We have other agencies that do a lot of the same. There's a lot of overlap between agencies.
Right.
So I would love to see money go back to taxpayers, right? But that's not what this bill is going to do. What this bill does, it doesn't stop the FBI from, being weaponized against the people, but it thwarts them in being able to execute that weaponization because they don't have the staffing. In order, they really do rely on those local law enforcement officers to be able to carry through this weaponized plan. And so that's really all we're doing with this, is just saying, okay, you have your weaponized agenda, but you're going to have to get it past the county sheriff. He's the gatekeeper.
Right. And as I understood it before, when one of their officers would sign on to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, he would lose them for whatever period of time. I'm assuming whatever period of time was agreed to, but he had no idea what that guy was working on. It's not like the guy reported to him every day. It's not like the FBI just, came by to pick him up when they needed him. He was basically dedicated to him. So, most of our police departments are not necessarily overstaffed already. So I don't know, I don't quite understand why in most counties a sheriff would have that extra manpower to say, yeah, okay, I'm just going to let you go hang out with the feds for X number of days, weeks, months, whatever, and I'm not going to know what's going on. I just don't understand why they would ever agree to that. I guess the money benefits for the department must have been pretty good to get them to go along with that. It's the only thing I can speculate on.
Right. And that's what Steve explains, is that the FBI comes in and offers to pay for overtime for those officers. They might have other resources. They might provide training, but there's a carrot that they're dangling for sure.
Right.
And so that's where you get this kind of attitude of, we're not going to ever step on the toes of the FBI because we want the goodies.
But go ahead. I'm sorry.
We are paying for those agents to then, like you said, be completely commandeered and working in a federal agenda while they are still on the payroll of your county sheriff department or your local law enforcement. So you're paying them to also be weaponized against you. So where do you want your tax dollars going? Do you want it going to real crime, or do you want it to go towards an agenda that's going after pro-life activists or school board moms or someone who questions the validity of an election?
Right. So were there any police departments or sheriffs that testified against your legislation last time?
Oh, interesting that you ask. There were a few agencies. Now, it wasn't a police department or a county sheriff that came and testified, but it's usually those federal agencies. So we did have strong opposition from TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, because they're very invested with their federal partners. The Sheriff's Association didn't testify, but I heard, were opposed. And that's not the county sheriffs, that's just the Sheriff's Association.
Right.
Then there was, Department of Safety. Yes.
That's what I would consider the usual suspects, because those are the same guys that fight against any and every gun bill. Yeah.
That's right. Yep. So it kind of makes you wonder who they're creating safety for.
Yeah, it's not us, that's for sure.
So I expect we'll have that same or similar opposition this time around. Again, I have to keep clarifying that this is not trying to, or it will not change investigations into criminal activity.
Right.
That is not the goal here. So no information sharing is going to be impeded when it comes to, like I said before, if there's trafficking of drugs or children or people in general, crime, all of those investigations are still ongoing and the information sharing is still wide open. This is strictly the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is tasked with going after American citizens who are not politically aligned with the current administration.
Right, right. Now, you said that this bill or variations of it are being worked in other states. Where did you get the idea for this bill? Is this something that you and Steve Friend and others came up with, or did this come from maybe a state law proposed somewhere else?
No, this was completely from Steve, not my brain. This came from Steve Friend. We had actually attempted a different version, and there was so much opposition, it didn't look like we were going to be able to get it passed. And then he ultimately felt like this version would actually be easier to get passed and would actually be even better. We were originally trying to just block the local law enforcement from being able to be on a joint terrorism task force at all. Right. And in hindsight, that probably would never have been successful. But to be able to say, we're putting the power back into your county sheriff gets to decide if the cases that they're working on, if they have permission to work on those cases. And again, FBI can keep working those cases, but they can't use your local law enforcement to do it unless the sheriff gives it the okay.
Right. Now, I'm trying to remember which committee in the Senate, because I think there was more opposition in the Senate, which the Senate is normally our problem with pretty much anything. I don't know that it sailed through the House, but I think in the Senate it really wasn't getting anywhere at all in the Senate. You remember which committee that was?
So it was Senate Judiciary. They never heard the bill. So what happened was with the first draft of the bill, that did get heard in committee in the House Criminal Subcommittee.
Okay.
We had a lot of supporters. I mean, I think 5 or 6 co-sponsors that are actually in that committee that were supporting the bill. There was a lot of discussion. There were a lot of questions. Steve was there to answer questions. There was still confusion. And so we decided to go ahead and roll the bill. And that's when we modified it and submitted a new amendment. So that new amendment should have been heard by the Senate Judiciary Committee. And it was at that point where they never made a motion to even hear it, or a motion to or a second to hear it. So, and that's unfortunate because one of those committee members had actually promised to me that he would make a motion to hear the bill. And so he obviously failed on following through on that promise.
Well, feel free to name names. We don't mind at all.
Yeah. Oh, that was Senator Rose.
Oh, okay.
He made a promise to my face, looked me in the eye and said, I can do that. I can make a motion to hear the bill.
Yeah. Until somebody else told him not to, I'm sure.
Right. And as you and I know, and hopefully your viewers are keen to this as well, that they oftentimes know what bills are going to kill before they even sit down in committees. Someone's already kind of pulling strings behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, and while we're talking about that, because the Republicans have a supermajority in the House and the Senate. They run every committee, and anything that gets through is because they want it to get through. Anything that doesn't get through is because they don't want it to get through. But I think it's really bad when they don't even want it to be heard. And when they don't want it to be heard, they won't give it a second. Well, sometimes in some bills won't even get a motion. When you file the bill and the representative or the senator presents it to the committee, he has to have a motion, and then he has to have a second. Well, I think I'm not saying that it has never happened where, a bill was just so bad or so many Republicans on the committee just totally disagreed with it. They didn't feel like extending the professional courtesy to give it a motion in a second, knowing that I think that's very rare. So what I really suspect happens is leadership, so-called leadership. If it's in the Senate, you're talking McNally. If it's in the House, you're talking Sexton. And or it could just be the committee chair. Hey guys, don't even make a motion on this. No motion and or no second. Because these are Republicans presenting these bills to a Republican majority committee. And when it gets killed, when it doesn't even get a motion or a second, in my book, I'm going to bet that that's because leadership, so-called, didn't even want to they didn't want to take a risk of that bill being heard and getting a motion.
That's right. It's important for your viewers to know that what your senators will try to tell you the reason is, well, it's late in the session, and bills that are introduced this late, it's just understood that the bill sponsor doesn't care about the bill. Or they'll say, well, we didn't make a motion to hear it because the bill sponsor didn't work the bill. No one ever came and talked to me about the bill. Or they'll make up all kinds of things, or we didn't have time. Oh, I didn't see it on my dashboard. I mean, I heard all of these excuses afterwards. But the fact of the matter is that the TBI and the Sheriff's Association and the Department of Safety, they all had time to read the bill. They all had time to go and lobby against the bill. The decision was made behind the scenes before they ever got out there to just not even hear the bill. They didn't want to have to vote on it.
Yeah, because if there's no vote, I mean, there's fewer people that get hurt by that on the committee. Then they, say, well, hey, I didn't get to vote on it. And certainly, if it doesn't get through committee, it doesn't get to the floor. And most of the time, if a bill gets to the floor, as you know, odds are it's going to pass. 9 times out of 10, it's going to pass if it gets to the floor. And that's why the committees are there to, committees are make or break. And, we need the people out there that can be at important committee meetings, or at least when a meeting's coming up on a bill, if you can at least call, email, those things really help. We will always be outnumbered on the ground up there because the left can turn out. Turning out bodies is not a problem for them. Filling up the committee rooms, not a challenge for them. And we can't match that. We could do a whole lot better than what we do, but we'll never be able to match it. But phone calls and emails do have a big impact. And so I hope this is a bill. I'm glad it's coming back. And I think this is going to be one of the important bills we need to get passed this year.
Absolutely. And so you're right. Phone calls, emails, all important. But relationships are important too. And for any of your viewers who you have never reached out and shaken the hand of your state rep or your state senator, now's a really good time to do it. They're counting on your vote. Yep. If they're an incumbent, to keep them in office. If they're challenging an incumbent, they're counting on your vote to win them a seat. Now's a good time to make that connection and get to know them before they're in session. Because once they're in session, it's kind of like they're on the field during Super Bowl. It's not the easiest time to get their attention. So start building that relationship today. They live in your district. They are your neighbor. Reach out and ask if you can meet them for coffee for 30 minutes and go buy them a coffee and just start getting to know them and see. And, you don't have to say a lot. You can listen to them talk and kind of understand where they're coming from and how they think and what their area of expertise is. And maybe they will also reveal to you that there's an area they could use some support on. They need their constituents to partner with them, bring them good data and good information and good legislation, good ideas. Ask them, how can I help you? What bills do you find important for next session? How can I help you get some of those bills across the finish line? Yeah. So this is the perfect time to reach out and partner with them. Don't make an enemy of them. Partner with them and be valuable to them. If you can create that kind of relationship, that's better. Now, if they're just kind of a dud and you're not going to be able to build that relationship and you figure that out, then you can be the squeaky wheel. But now's the time. Don't wait till January, till their first the first subcommittee that they're going to sit on, and then all of a sudden you want to start talking to them. Now's the time.
Right, absolutely. Well, and two, after November, that's when they will get together and figure out who's on what committees. And like I said, everything happens in the committees as far as it's make or break for bills. So that's when they'll be having to reconfigure their committees, will be after the November elections. And so some of them will stay on the same committees. You'll have some new faces here in certain committees, but a couple things they do, they kind of figure that piece out, but they also start talking about what they want to put forward as a caucus. They start talking about that October, November timeframe. It's not like they just show up in January and, oh, let's see what everybody's got for us. No, they're right now, I'm sure some of them, at least if they don't have a competitor in the general election, and to be honest with you, most of them don't, they're thinking about, okay, what are my legislative priorities for this upcoming session? Now, we're always going to be outnumbered in terms of the left, but hey, even just the lobbyists up there. And the lobbyists are there all the time. They're there 24/7. We can't be there 24/7. But right now, you know, during election time, they're in the district. You're going to have more access to them now than you will, because once session gets in, they have some long days up there. I mean, you know, they start at 8 o'clock with a lot of their committees, and it may be, 6, 7, I guess sometimes later, before they get out at the end of the day. And they do have a lot. It's a very hectic schedule, and you can kind of get to know them now and kind of let them know what your priorities are. And like Aundrea said, find out what they want to work on. If it's not something that's, in your opinion, unconstitutional or that you just can't support, you can kind of figure out how to help them, and maybe that will help. Maybe that will encourage them to work on some of the legislation that you want. But you do have to build relationships. Always be nice to the secretaries when you call. Most of them are up there pretty. I really have only had a problem with maybe 1 or 2 of the secretaries up there, but generally they're really nice. But it's important that you're nice to the secretaries. If you make the secretaries mad, you're going to make the rep or senator mad. You're not going to get any help. I can tell you that right now.
Yes.
The first conversation you have with your rep or senator will be, why are you harassing my secretary? So just keep that in mind.
Right. Yeah, they're the gatekeeper. So we have to remember that they're human beings. They do get treated poorly. You know, they might get death threats throughout the session, depending on who they're working for. If they work for someone who's got a real backbone, then they probably get harassed more over the phone than others.
Yep.
So yeah, we have to build those relationships. Do it on your turf, which is in the district. You have the home field advantage that way. I do know that some legislators already have their 15 bills planned out. So everybody in the House, every House member can file 15 bills. On the Senate side, they're not restricted to a particular number of bills, but every bill must have a House sponsor and a Senate sponsor.
Right.
Unfortunately, on the Senate side, it's very overwhelming because sometimes they can end up carrying, you know, dozens and dozens of bills, and that's a lot to keep straight in your head.
Yep.
But I know some legislators already have their 15 bills planned out. So and not everybody carries 15 bills, you know, some might only want to take 7 or 8, but they can carry up to 15. Right. And I believe that some of them in leadership are not limited. Is that right?
Well, the leadership, because they usually end up carrying bills, unfortunately, in my opinion, for the governor, which is a whole nother can of worms. But then they also, certain ones of them have to carry the sunset provision bills every year. So, you know, they have passed these bills that have sunset provisions. Then it's up to them when that date comes to either, you know, I guess either have it renewed or, you know, okay, we're going to let this lapse. So they get loaded up with that. But like you said, the Senate has no limit. So the House guy only has 15, but the senators have to have a House sponsor, so they're going to end up working on more than 15 bills. And that's another thing too. Most of them, in addition to their 15, it's going to be what committees they're on. That's what they're going to know about. They're going to know about what they submitted, They're going to know about the bills coming to their committee. Most of them won't even look at a bill. If they didn't file it, they won't even look at it until it's like scheduled for their committee. If it's not even in their committee and they're not going to vote on it until it gets to the floor, you're not going to get them to spend any time with that, you know. So the other thing to that too, and being fair to them, you know, they may be your House or Senate rep, but they're only going to know about so many things. There may be things that are important to you that need to be done that you want them to sponsor, but they don't know anything about the issue, okay? And if it's an issue that can go through the committees they're on, you know, you're going to have to educate them. But here's the catch on that. You can't give them a catalog or a big old binder of things to look through. You got to break it down into bullet points. You know, if you're giving them more than a page or a page and a half of something, it's not even going to get looked at. Because you're talking about 1,500, 2,000 bills every year that go through. I'm not saying they all get passed, but I know they're looking at least at 1,500, 2,000 every year. So there's no way one person can be, you know, up to date on every issue. So keep that in mind too.
Yes. So if you're trying to say with the FBI bill, if you're wanting to educate your particular legislator, the time to do that is now. Yep. And I'm going to give that resource. It's a 1-page. It's very clear. Here's the problem. Here's the solution. Here's why we need. It's very straightforward. It's not like you're handing them, you know, a 16-page primer that they have to read, because they won't. We got to make it simple and easy and to the point. And you know, making sure people see that emotional connection as well, to how this could impact them or how it has already impacted their constituents. So you have to make it very relatable to them. So that's a really good point, that we need to bring things. You can do a drip campaign over time. That means you're building that relationship over time with that legislator, and you're just kind of pouring into them a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. The other thing you mentioned is you're exactly right. They don't even want to hear about bills that aren't coming to them in committee. So paying attention to the calendar is really important. Knowing the right legislators to talk to about your bill. So right now is a good time to talk to everybody about it. But then when January comes around, we're ready for this to be on notice and to be heard. We're going to be going straight to the subcommittee in the House that's going to hear it first. We don't need to talk to every legislator. We need to focus on that subcommittee because they're the only ones that are going to get past that subcommittee. Yeah. And then in the Senate committee. So knowing how to strategize and plan out and organize who you're going to talk to, and then obviously having your resources ready that you can have a conversation, have something you can leave them with on your way out the door is really important. And then once it passes subcommittee, then you can broaden and go to the full committee, right? And then if there's a note, you're going to go to Finance, Ways and Means and make sure that they understand why it's important to pass this. So really important to strategize that. And I'll be laying out those action steps in January, like with emails and phone numbers of exactly and names of exactly who you're going to contact and when to contact them, because it doesn't make sense to start doing all of that until they know they're actually going to hear it. The other thing I would say too, like you mentioned, you know, your legislators are going to be assigned to a particular committee. So let's say they're assigned to education and maybe a health committee or something like that. And they might have some background knowledge in those issues. But maybe they don't. But either which way, it's actually a really good idea if you're someone who understands education or health, or maybe you understand transportation really well. If you have a wheelhouse of knowledge, you can be one of those people that's incredibly valuable, not just to your legislator, but to the whole state. If you're able to read bills and then provide some input to your legislators. So if they're sitting on particular committees, maybe you want to read some of the bills that they're going to be hearing in committee, and then give them some bullet points of, you know, feedback from your perspective, from your expertise, and help them understand. Because even if they have a little background knowledge, that doesn't mean they know everything, and doesn't mean they have time to research.
Right.
You know, could you imagine if they're hearing hundreds of bills? Sometimes on those dockets, there'll be over 100 bills. You know they're
Yeah.
not going to get to them all in that day. But you think they're really like
Yeah.
last night, the night before committee? Do you think they sat and read 30 bills even
No.
and research to really even understand what those bills are going to do? They're relying on leadership to tell them
Yeah.
what to do, and we don't want that.
No.
So if we don't want them to just constantly listen to what leadership says, we need to be there to fill in that gap. And they need experts. We have experts, brilliant people across the state of Tennessee that could do this, could read a few bills and provide some input for your legislators on those bills and really make a positive impact. So they're not always relying on the leadership or, oh, the governor wants this, you better pass it because the governor wants it. No, let's actually read it and dissect it and see what it's all about.
Yeah, and if it's from the governor, it's suspect already. Remember, the chairman of the committee, they are key as well. And just because you only have your rep or senator on that committee, that doesn't mean that's the only call, only office you'll call. You know, if there's an important bill going through, you'll be making several calls. And man, some of these committees have a lot of people on them, so there's a lot to it. But you know, here's the deal: they're going to hear from us. If they don't hear from us, they're only hearing from leadership and lobbyists. Okay, so those are your choices. You either want them to hear from you at least as well, or you're going to let leadership and lobbyists fill in the blanks, and that doesn't turn out good for any of us. So you mentioned you're going to have a one-pager. When will that be ready, Aundrea?
It's ready now. I'll email it to you.
Okay, great. And we'll get it posted on our website here. And are you going to have do you know yet if you're going to have a special website for this bill? Are you that far along on that?
You know, I wasn't planning on doing a website, but I was considering maybe putting together a Zoom.
Okay.
So I could allow people to come from across the state to hear about it. And I mean, I can do that in probably 30 or 40 minutes at the most and give people the resources that they need, answer questions, and so forth.
Okay. Well, hey.
And really just give people the game plan.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you for being with us and for fighting the good fights. Always good to see you and talk to you and appreciate what you do.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we'll definitely have you back. I've got a few announcements and information to talk about for next week. Thank you all for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you won't miss any episodes. Goes a long way to help us stay on the air. We appreciate your support. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tninformer.com, and find us and follow us on both Facebook and X. Use our name at TNinformer. We finally have a date for the summer study session on the nullification bill. The committee will meet on Thursday, October 3rd from 12:30 to 3:30 p.m. Central in Nashville at the Capitol. Well, probably in the Cordell Hull building. We don't have a room number yet. As soon as we get it, we'll pass it out. The meeting is open to the public, and we do need to fill the room. Jeff Cobble, the author of the nullification bill, will be speaking in defense of the bill. And we actually have Joe Wolverton, who has agreed to be the second speaker at that event as well. Some of the legislators do intend to hide behind the AG's opinion opposing this legislation, but Jeff Cobble did a great job on this show back in March, showing the weaknesses and inaccuracies in the AG's opinion. You can watch it for yourself or read the transcript on the website tncss.weebly.com under the nullification/Constitution tab. Scroll to the bottom and watch or you can read either the long or short versions for yourself or watch the videos. Share with your friends and definitely your elected officials. Next Tuesday, September 17th, which is Constitution Day, and that will be our topic Monday, and our guest will be Joe Wolverton. He'll be here speaking with us again on the Constitution, and that guy he's a very good speaker if you haven't heard him before, and he just has a wealth of knowledge on the Constitution and on American history. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.